Action.
Before he could make the most expensive, most successful film of all time, James Cameron had to make a journey.
Okay, the bow should be exactly, it should be dead ahead. Look at that, bingo. Check it out, there's Titanic.
To see with his own eyes and shoot with his own camera history's greatest shipwreck.
I wanted to go dive the Titanic so badly that I kind of grafted on a movie project to justify it.
And what he saw some 3 miles below the North Atlantic would come to haunt and obsess him.
There was no going back for me now. I was part of this thing. I'd been there, I'd witnessed it, and as a filmmaker, it was my responsibility to communicate what I had seen.
Tonight, Ship of Dreams, a filmmaker's odyssey. It was just about a year ago that the second Titanic disaster stories started emerging. Here was this obsessive-compulsive director, James Cameron, who had taken an already huge budget of over $100 million and just about doubled it. There was, the experts and critics and cynics said, no way that the film could be anything but a financial fiasco. You may recall the film was scheduled to open last summer. When the opening was delayed until the fall, that simply affirmed what the prophets of doom had been predicting. In the wake of Titanic's enormous critical and commercial success, James Cameron now looks like a genius. Throughout the making of the film, though, and before, his behavior was that of a man possessed. To get to the actual wreck of the Titanic, Cameron needed 2 deep-diving submersibles. There are only 5 of them in the world, capable of operating at more than 2.5 miles down. 2 of those are aboard the Russian research vessel Akademik Mstislav Keldysh. So that's where it began. 5 years ago, James Cameron, a film crew, and a group of Russian scientists 700 miles east of Nova Scotia in the middle of the North Atlantic. That proved to be such an extraordinary story in itself that we have, in effect, given over the rest of this program to James Cameron.
I kind of have a confession to make, which is that when I got this idea of going to the Titanic, it was almost a little bit the tail wagging the dog. I wanted to go dive the Titanic so badly that I kind of grafted on a movie project to justify it. But at first, it was just, this is going to be the coolest dive ever. And if I have to work for another year on a movie after that, that's fine. I'll do it. And you're in blackness falling for 2 hours, more or less, at 90 feet per minute. You can see little particles going by in the lights of the sub, but it's just black out there. There's no sunlight. So you're falling for the greater part of the descent into virtually the unknown. We called it the expedition, the deep diving expedition, because you have to think of it that way. We were really mounting an expedition. No one had ever used a motion picture camera at that kind of deep ocean depth before. What I wanted to do was to go down there and actually rehearse and drive around the ship and get the 2 subs into correct positions relative to each other and actually make shots that had to resemble in some way a plan. So we built a huge model of the wreck, which was about 15 feet long, right on the deck, and every day before we would do a dive and take these 2 subs down into blackness and currents and the unpredictability of working with water, we would rehearse exactly the shots as they were supposed to be. And that's the shot. And Jana, I may ask you to come a little more there, like that, just to get the light on this. And I would ask my sub-pilot, Dr. Sagalevich, to drive his model over the big model of the wreck and show me on the monitor the shot that I wanted once we were really down there. These guys spoke Russian and we spoke English. So there was a lot of sign language going along in the sub too. A lot of hand Italian, you know, no, that way, no, that way. A new camera system had to be designed to function at that depth. My brother came up with a design which extrapolated from existing housing designs. It was basically a big cylinder made out of titanium, and it had a glass end on it that the camera could look out through. I was in mirror 1, My pilot was Dr. Sagalevich.
10 meters from us.
I was in the observer seat, which was mostly taken up by camera equipment, camera control equipment, and I was kind of hunched into a little tiny corner.
We are recording, and we'll do a little look around. Yeah, go for it, Joe.
In the other sub, there was Mir 2's pilot, Jana Chernayev, and Al Giddings, who was shooting the documentary footage. Also, the third man was Jeff Leda, the ROV pilot. He actually, you know, using little joystick controls, would fly or pilot, they call it flying, the ROV, because it behaves very much like an underwater helicopter. And ROVs are the way that, that science puts cameras in places that human beings can't reach and that submersibles can't reach. The ROV launch and recovery system didn't work properly right away and had to have parts made, and we basically almost built part of it on the ship as we went along. So it had this great kind of, you know, baling wire and gaffer's tape kind of feel to it as we were cobbling this stuff together, mixed in with this unbelievably exotic high technology. From my dive log for September 5th, my first deep dive in Mir has been 16.5 hours to a depth of 4,106 meters. Seeing the bottom of the Atlantic almost 3 miles down, coming up to meet us in the greenish glow of the quartz floodlight is a near religious experience. In front of me, I have a little viewport about this big. Anatoly, who was driving the sub, had a slightly larger viewport, and he's operating an 18-ton vehicle from through this little tiny viewport. Kind of like driving your car on the freeway with the entire windshield painted out, except for maybe you've scraped off a little hole about that big. And it was actually possible, and I know this sounds crazy, but it was possible to be next to the Titanic, 6 feet away from it, you know, touching distance practically, and with a little bit of a current, a little bit of turbulence, you could lose the Titanic. You could lose it.
Just go another couple meters and we should be able to see the ship.
We wound up landing, I think, half a mile from Titanic. Now we have to find the damn thing. We don't know where it is because we don't know exactly where we are relative to the wreck. Certainly not on the first dive. And I had fantasized what it would be like to see the Titanic for the first time, as I think anyone would. I could picture it. I could picture it from the video footage. I could see this thing coming out of the blackness into our lights. And that's what I thought was going to happen. What actually happened was completely different. And we were about to crash right into it. And so my first glimpse of Titanic was this big piece of hull that was towering above the sub. And I started yelling at Anatoly, go left, go left, go left. And we just crashed right into it. The next thing we know, the real ship is right in front of us. And he powers up and goes over it. And he just plops it down on the deck, and there we are. Thank you, gentlemen. We are now at Titanic. The second dive, by contrast, actually was an almost textbook operation. It went exactly the way we planned it. We were starting to get into a groove. For the first time, I actually put the whole technical end of it a little bit further back in my mind and allowed myself some moments to say, my God, I am really at Titanic. I'm at the place that I so wanted to be.
Look at that, bingo. Check it out, there's Titanic.
But the first time I really let it into my heart was after the dive, was at the end of the dive, sitting in my room by myself. I had brought some music with me that was just meant to kind of evoke the story and so on, and I had put that on, and the images started playing back through my head of the boat deck and the davit still sitting there that had launched Lifeboat 1. And I thought about all the people huddled there on that part of the deck, right where our submersible was sitting. At the very last second, as the bridge rail went underwater and the Atlantic poured over it like a wave and washed up that deck and washed those people away, what they must have felt. And for me, it was such an epiphany, a dark epiphany, to realize that I now was connected to a tragic event where people died. And it's very hard to describe, but it's like there was no going back for me now. I was part of this thing. I'd been there, I'd witnessed it, and as a filmmaker, it was my responsibility to communicate what I had seen. But on another level, there was just that window opening on kind of human perception of what it must have been like for those people in that moment. And you know, you hear about history, you hear about the Titanic, it was sad, it was noble, some panicked, others didn't, but all of that sort of information went away, and it was just, what was it like for those people in those last few minutes? And the fear, the incomprehension, the sense of whatever, betrayal by God. How could this be happening, you know? And just the pure primal fear of meeting your own death. And I could visualize it so clearly. You know, I was sitting there crying like a kid. And it sort of was a real wake-up to what the mission was, what the mission really was. And from that point, I kind of relaxed a little bit about whether I got the exact shot I needed or whatever, because I started looking for images that were evocative in some way. I had gone there with a plan, and I had tried to superimpose my plan on the ship, but I hadn't gone there as a student or as an acolyte and let the ship speak to me.
I've never seen anything like this.
I made myself a promise that on every dive, I would spend some time just taking in the ship. We might take a break in the middle of the shooting, and I'd say, Anatoly, just land the sub on the boat deck of the wreck. Let's just sit there for a minute. You know, we'll grab a sandwich, we'll have a cup of tea. And the funny thing is, you know, this Russian crew, they're very emotional people, not maybe the way we think they are. And they got that. That's like, fine, yeah, sure, you have to do that.
You want to set your height at about 17 meters from the bottom.
And again, from the dive log, September 24th. Spirits are high until we reach the bottom and discover that visibility is rotten, the worst we've seen yet.
Okay, Jenna and Jeff, be advised, we are right behind you, like 3 meters. Do not back up, do not back up.
Small sponges roll across the bottom like tumbleweeds, and as the current grows even stronger, I'm reminded of a sandstorm in the desert.
This is unbelievable. I've never seen anything this bad. Just a snowstorm out there.
Well, you know, true filmmaker, I wasn't going to let that stop me. I still had to get some shots. So at the depth of Titanic, you have this tremendous pressure, and the housing for the camera had to withstand this tremendous pressure. We found out partway through the dive expedition that the Russians were calling the camera housing the cannon. If that glass failed, that water would rush down with the force of a cannon and knock the end off the housing and fire it into the sub. It literally would shoot down your own sub. It was a little bit like riding around for 16 hours in a car with a shotgun taped to your head, you know, and just saying to everybody, okay, don't touch the trigger, okay, guys? So we're coming in across the sand, and I have the imaging sonar going. I can see the ship, and I'm saying, you know, 15 meters, 12 meters, 10 meters, and we're getting to the point where we should be slowing down and getting ready to actually visually see it. And I say, okay, Anatoly, better start slowing down. He hits full reverse, and we just keep going forward. And at the last second, I realize we're not slowing down, and we're going right into the side of the ship. And it's just a solid wall of steel. And I realize the camera is pointing straight forward. So I grab the camera controls. I try to spin the camera really quickly. It doesn't react because I've done it too fast.
I don't think we have a chance here.
So I stopped and turned the wheel very slowly. And meanwhile, I'm watching the wall coming. The camera turns slowly, and we hit. The hull came to within maybe, you know, a half inch of the glass. And, you know, we sort of stopped, and there was a shower of rust. I just pulled the plug at that point and said, okay, this dive's over, and we have to get out of here. Then it got interesting, because we decided to come back. We found out that we couldn't. Anatoly reaches over and punches this little button that's supposed to light up white. Nothing happens. I'm like, uh-oh. We had used up the sub's power. And then you see a real frenzy of activity. Instantly, everybody in the sub just started switching things off. So I'm thinking, we've got a slow leak, and we're going to be stuck here for a long time, like forever. So we dropped back down. We pumped again. Took about an hour. Sub lifts up, and it falls back down. And I'm like, that's it. We're doomed. We tried it one more time, and we lifted up. We stopped, and we kept going. In the dark, you know, as we slowly went back to the surface. right at the end, I said to Anatoly, I want to go down one more time. The subs were kind of beat up from the whole thing, and everybody just wanted to head for home, but this strange kind of spirit had taken over. And I said, let's dive and let's go inside the ship with the ROV. I mean, really inside. Let's just go for broke and see what we find. And the sole purpose of the dive, in my mind, was to take the robot inside the ship and do it as carefully and surgically as possible, not disturb anything, but to penetrate in deeper than anybody had seen before. He's up against the hull right now. I can see his spotlight hitting the hull. We called our ROV Snoop Dogg, you know, because he was sent to snoop around inside the ship, and he reminded me, I always call him he reminded me of a dog because he was on a leash. And then he became like this little champ. I had made myself a promise as a producer, before I ever went out to the middle of the ocean, that I would not jeopardize my one and only Snoop Dogg to go inside Titanic where it could get stuck and we'd have to cut the tether and never see it again. And I wound up breaking that promise to myself because it was too tantalizing. What existed just in those shadows, just beyond the edges of our lights, it just drew us in. So we launched the ROV, we shone our lights down into this big yawning pit that goes down 5 or 6 decks into the ship. We went all the way down to the D deck level, and we went in. And no one had been in there before. Unfortunately, the staircase itself is gone. It was thought by previous expeditions, the conclusion was that the wood was all gone, that the glory of the interior of Titanic was really gone. So we didn't know what to expect. The first thing we see is a perfectly preserved, hand-carved oak column. And there it is, right in front of our eyes, and we just went crazy. This was so wonderful.
Looking at a chandelier, looks like a chandelier, okay?
In the film, those are the real doors, as they sit now at the bottom of the ocean. And I so wanted to go and explore them, but we ran out of tether right then. The dog reached the end of its leash. So we turned around and came back. We came up through the stairwell and we went into the B deck level, and we got to the suite, which I had set as a target, and of suite B51. And J.P. Morgan was in fact booked in that suite, but canceled at the last minute, and it was taken by another group. And we were in there with the ROV for the first time. No one had ever seen it, didn't really know what to expect. But we saw the bronze sconces still on the walls and the bronze trim around the windows. It was really exciting. And I said to Jeff, turn left, let's see if the fireplace is there. And the camera came around, and it was just sitting there with the marble on each side and the wood uprights of the hearth, and there it was. So, you know, we're deep into the heart of the ship at this point, and just feeling like we've gone into King Tut's tomb or something. And it turned out that this crazy Hollywood movie was actually disproving what the scientists had thought up till then. We come back to the ship.
It'd be deep down there.
But there's still one thing to do, because we haven't sort of officially paid our respect to the Titanic wreck. And my friend Louis Abernethy had made up a wreath, weighted with lead weights so that it would sink, and it said, you know, in loving remembrance of the 1,500 souls lost April 15th, 1912. We were in a fog bank, and our ship, the Keldysh, was sitting in a ray of sun in the middle of this fog bank, and it was like we were surrounded by bright white mist. We lowered the wreath over the side, and we started to drive away, and I looked astern into the wake of the ship just as we pulled away from the gravesite of Titanic. And there was a white rainbow. Not a colored rainbow, a white rainbow. And the scientific part of my mind knows that, you know, that's a phenomenon. It happens occasionally. It's called a gloriole. But it was a pure white rainbow, and it stayed until we were out of sight of the wreck site, and then it just disappeared into the fog. You know, I'm a very rational person, and I'm not superstitious, and I'm not even terribly religious, but I felt somehow that was a manifestation of something. And everything after that on this production was influenced, in my mind, by that moment, because it was the moment where I said, I have to do this right. We're at the beginning of the film, and she's just starting to tell the story.
Titanic was called the Ship of Dreams, and it was. It really was.
It's a certain type of storytelling that collapses time based on the way the heart and the mind perceive time. And it kind of yanks us back into the present, and in a way we don't want to go. Very few people will ever go to Titanic, to the wreck site. It's incumbent on every one of them to come away and tell the story to the best of their ability. I have to do this right. I have to do the rest of this movie right, so that people will always remember the Titanic.
And that's our report for tonight. I'm Ted Koppel in Washington. For all of us here at ABC News,